Hey everybody, this is herculespetix, founder, curator, docent, and gift shop employee of the herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies. Today we're going to be looking at Strange Adventures number 1 through 4 of Vertigo Comics miniseries from 1999 running until 2000. Around this time, Vertigo was publishing lots of these miniseries that were just nice little anthologies, bringing back the anthology basically to comics, because it's kind of died out, and also using old DC titles. I imagine this served dual purposes. DC got to keep these old titles, keep their copyright alive, and also Vertigo got to, I don't know, have a good time just getting various writers and artists to make an anthology. These were edited by Axel Alonso, who was just coming up through Vertigo at this time. Great editor. He's like one of those guys like Bob Schreck or Archie Goodwin, where just it seems like really talented people want to work with him, and he has a really good eye for talented people. So whenever guys like that edit comics, all these great contributors pop up. And pretty soon after this, he went to Marvel Comics. And all of a sudden, Marvel had all these great creators that they never had before. They obviously followed Axel Alonso to Marvel. So he's that kind of editor. So it's just a really nice lineup. There's some stellar names in these comics. And let's crack them open. Number 1 here starts off with a nice cover by Brian Bolland. I mean, what can you say? Brian Bolland just always draws impeccably. It's every cover. Little contents page. Each issue starts with the Strange Adventures. Instead of a contributor's bio, they ask each contributor to recount the strangest adventure they've ever had. So it's kind of fun. All these guys have weird little stories from their life. Seems like a bunch of them are seeing UFOs. We start off with this first story, The Kappas, written and illustrated by Brian Bolland. This is a treat because by the late 90s, Brian Bolland was barely drawing interiors in comics anymore. Just strictly a cover artist, which he continues to be. He just doesn't really draw comics anymore. He's an illustrator, cover artist. And this is an interesting story, even though it's kind of a big MacGuffin. We see this these gentlemen, European explorers. This is like, I think, back in like the late 1800s. And they're basically in, like, I think they're in Mongolia. And they're gonna, what's the word? Explore the ancient ruins of Lapnor, some, mythical place. But really, it's just an excuse for Brian Bolland to talk about man's inhumanity to his fellow man. And look at this shit. Just Brian Bolland, man. Like, I can draw anything perfectly. Every character is just amazingly drawn. So there's a local warlord, so they have to stay in the city. They basically have to pay the warlord kind of like a tithing or a fine just to be allowed to go to the city. And while they're waiting for the paperwork, they're stuck in this crappy little desert town. The first day there, they see this, I guess, some kind of criminal getting punished. And in this town, they have this horrible punishment where they put a guy in a cage like this. There's a board that his feet rest on, and it's just low enough where he has to tippy-toe or he'll suffocate, because his neck is in this tight thing. And if he doesn't tippy-toe, he'll strangle himself. So it's this horrible torture where basically you have to, when you just get too exhausted to tippy-toe anymore, you just don't breathe for a little while. And then you get back on your tippy-toes. Seems a horrible way to die. And I guess this is a common occurrence in this town because everyone's just acting like it's a fun tourist attraction. In fact, a market grows up around it. Whenever they punish someone this way, all these merchants come to sell their wares because so many people come from far and wide to just ogle some poor guy being tortured. Every morning they lower the board almost imperceptibly to make his torture even worse and worse. Just shows off all the stuff, the weird stuff the markets are selling. They basically Brian Bolland shows these guys how callous and lacking of empathy they are, because they think it's funny to have a tiptoe contest to see who can tiptoe the longest. All the while, like, taking pictures in front of this dying man. They eventually find out why this guy was being punished. It's basically like he didn't do anything wrong. He just, him and his mother, they lived in a little farm. They took in this other band of Europeans who preceded these guys. And they fed them and let them rest at their place before they moved on. And they didn't know that those Europeans didn't pay their fine to the local warlord. So the local warlord declared that anyone who helped those guys or gave them shelter or whatever would be executed. So this poor guy, he didn't even know he was breaking a law, you know? He was just being nice. And turns out that first European group that didn't pay their fine, it was led by the younger brother of the narrator. The next morning, their last morning before they head out on their expedition, the cage is empty. Obviously, the guy died. And the narrator doesn't seem fazed at all. It doesn't care. And this is like, shows how, like, what a MacGuffin this whole story is. The story is one big MacGuffin. Because he says, thus finally we began our great and strange adventure across the Totleben to the mythical wandering lake of Lop Nor, not to mention the rescue of Brother Percy, the story of which I will now tell. And that's the last page. So it's like, they introduce all this stuff like, oh, his younger brother, and he's got to rescue him. And just the fact that he does that teasing line, the story of which I will now tell, and that's the end. It's kind of like Brian Bolland. It's just like, you guys, I'm not going to tell you another, like, whatever Shangri-La, Lost City story. I really just wanted to show you how people are, you know. Really interesting way to end the story. Brian Bolland, he hasn't written much in his life, but I love his stuff. Like Mr. Mammalian, The Actress of the Bishop. He's a really good writer. I wish he wrote more. I wish he just did comic books. Here we get Dave Gibbons writing and drawing, of Watchmen fame. His longtime colorist partner, Angus McKay, coloring. And this one is very much like a 60s goofy sci-fi comic from DC. It takes place in 68, and there's this professor, and he's basically has invented this crazy machine. Let me see what it's called. He uses all this crazy jargon. It's called the hyper emulator. And whenever he turns it on, his assistant, like the first time he turns into a monkey gorilla. And when he turns the machine off, he goes back to normal. His assistant is kind of like this hippie kid who is interested in science, but he's also kind of like a hippie. The next time he turns on the machine, his head turns into Saturn. And because it's a gaseous planet, the room starts filling up with methane, and he throws an ashtray through the window to clear the air. And then the next day, the hippie kid is reading some underground comics, little homages to famous underground comics, Zip Comics. Hup, which actually became a comic from Mark Crumb many decades later. And this time it turns him invisible. The emulator turns the assistant invisible. So the professor throws ashes on him so he can, like, reappear, see where he is. So finally the professor thinks he has a brainstorm of why this is happening. And he says, where do you get those comic books? Oh, here's one called Snorf instead of Snarf. He says, they're right next door. And at that book and magazine store. So he goes and he sees the wall of comic books, the rack. It turns out it's on the wall immediately, you know, behind his laboratory. And he's all proud of himself. He's like, I knew there had to be a rational, scientific explanation. I want to give you a little of this dialogue, because this is the kind of like faux science, like a dialogue that's sometimes in these science fiction comics. He says, don't you see? Clearly the transliteral radiation from the hyper emulator has been reacting in a synergistic continuum disenfranchisement with the oxidizing polychromatics of the magazines to create the strange effects on you. But then the assistant just says, let me show you what's really happening here. Every morning I've been dosing your coffee with LSD because you got such a stick up your ass. I thought it might help you out and loosen you up. This machine has no guts in it. I took all the parts out and sold it to buy the LSD. So this is all in your head. And I'm heading out to Haight-Ashbury. I'm done with this science thing. And this guy is completely unfazed, the professor. And he basically says, whoa, Dwayne might be onto something there. He unwittingly suggested a radical redesign to me by gutting the machine. And he's just happily retooling his crazy machine, which probably will never work. And this also has like a little teaser ending, and that's when things got really strange. I don't know if it was the edict of the editor, but a lot of these comics do end with that little nebulous type ending thing. Here we have a story called Immune, written by Robert Rhodey and illustrated by Frank Wiley, the great Scottish cartoonist. Robert Rhodey, we've talked about him before. He kind of started out doing little short stories for Epic Illustrated, but in the mid to late 90s, started doing lots of stuff for Vertigo. And this is some world where this horrible disease is killing people left and right. And even the people who aren't dead all have like pock marks and boils, like they're marked by it. And the narrator is one of the few people who isn't, who's just completely immune, supposedly. And everyone resents him for it. He meets a woman one day who's also immune, because it's pretty rare that there's not many of them left. Almost everyone's sick or dying. And she has a friend who's immune, so he meets her. And so they hang out a lot. His coworkers just completely, it's almost like they think he's holding out on some secret. Like, why are you untouched by this disease and we're all dying? Eventually, his place goes out of business because there's not enough people to work there. And he finds himself hanging out with the two women more and more. He starts having weird, disturbing thoughts. He's like, I believe her name is Beth. She's the friend of Irene, the one that he first met. He's kind of has a crush on Irene. And he's like, I wouldn't mind if Beth got the disease, then she'd be out of the way. I could be alone with Irene. So one night the TV comes back on after weeks. It's the emergency broadcast system. And apparently there's a cure. And the narrator starts getting more and more paranoid. It's very subtle, because apparently this disease, even before it starts marking you, like physically, it makes you paranoid. But he doesn't have the disease as of yet, as far as he knows. And he starts like calling up Irene and Beth all the time, like, what are you guys doing? He totally suspects they're having an affair. They're lesbians. And then one day he loses his grandfather's watch and a few other things. And he's positive that Irene and Beth stole them. So he goes like a madman to their houses, to Beth's house, knocking on the window. I want my watch back. And he finds them on the street one day, and he starts ranting at them. Yeah, a security guard gets rid of him, has to shoot him in the arm, and he stumbles off into an alley. And he says, they'll be watching, waiting for me. I can't disguise it. One look and they'll know I'm the one. They'll see I'm immune. And they'll kill me for it. And we see clearly he's got the things on his face. He's not. He finally got the disease. I really like the way the story's written. It's that unreliable narrator thing. And because it is really, I kind of told it ham-fistedly. And but it really is subtle the way he gets paranoid. Because you know at the beginning of the story that that's one of the symptoms of the disease. So, you know, they couldn't be too abrupt about it, or you'd get where it was going. But it is pretty subtle. Like, at first you're just like, oh, well, maybe they are a couple, and he's chuffed that, you know, he doesn't get to be with Irene. But he slowly, his captions get more and more paranoid and crazy. Pretty good writing there. And of course, really nice Frank Wiley art. I didn't really talk about the Dave Gibbons art much, just because it's just typically great Dave Gibbons art. He all kind of always draws the same, and it's always pretty damn nice. Number 2 here, I love this cover. This is by, speaking of Epic Illustrated, Phil Hale, a discovery of Epic Illustrated. Beautiful, crazy cover. The boxing match. Looks like this guy's, I think it's the devil. He's got horns, and the devil's getting knocked out. First story here is written by Bruce Jones, one of my favorite writers growing up. Just one of the earliest good writers in the 70s. There weren't many good writers. And coming up from the undergrounds, he actually wrote really good stories with great character development, really interesting three-dimensional characters. And this is drawn by Edvin Bjokovic, Eastern European artist, did lots of Star Wars stuff for Dark Horse. Really solid, just nice cartoonist. Just a really good style. It's almost like perfect. And here we see these kind of interstellar mercenaries. They're not mercenaries. Yeah, I guess they're mercenaries. And the narrator is hooking up with his old buddy. I can't remember his name. We'll see. Oh, Verge. And Verge is this guy full of bonhomie. He's always joking around. And also really competent guy to have on a mission. So the narrator here is hooking up with him. And they're going to hook up with 3 other guys. And they've got a mission. There's this terraformed planet that is being terrorized by some creature that's already killed like 6 human beings. So they want these guys to go and basically hunt it down. As soon as they get close to the planet, the narrator realizes that Verge is definitely not himself. He's very morose, not joking around like he normally does. And one night he tells them a story. He's like, yeah, you know, before this planet was terraformed fully, my family landed here. Something went wrong with our engines. We had to land. It was pretty nice. Had breathable atmosphere and everything. Almost like the Geiger counter said that the planet was safe. Turns out the battery was out of the Geiger counter, and the father realizes this and says, get back in the ship immediately. This planet isn't safe because it's all going meep, meep, meep. So I guess it has too much radiation or something. And they left so fast they had to leave the family dog behind. And this is crazy harsh for a little kid. The father says, shoot him, son. He's already dead anyway. It'd be a mercy. And the little kid has to go on the mounted blasters on the spaceship and shoot his own dog. So you can imagine how scarring that is. That's why Verge has been so taciturn. So they're going out hunting this creature. And this creature seems to be able to go beyond all their technology. Like, they've got all these radar devices, and the creature starts picking them off one by one. He gets 2 of them, kills 2 of them. And then finally our narrator sees the beast. It looks like this crazy creature. And he's about to shoot it, and all of a sudden, everything goes black. When he wakes up, he goes back on the trail of this giant creature. And he sees Verge just standing there. And the creature runs at Verge. So he's, the narrator picks up his gun. He's going to, stop the beast. But he notices that the creature, all of a sudden, kind of like falters in his step and gets down on the ground right in front of Verge like a puppy. And he's whimpering. And it turns out to be his little dog that he shot. I guess it didn't kill him, and I guess the radiation of this planet, before it was terraformed, transformed him into this creature. It's so sad. So he's rubbing his belly. He sees his puppy after all these years. Good boy, that's a good boy. That's my big ugly puppy, yes. And he's scratching his neck. And then while he's distracting him with that, he pulls a gun. And he shoots him through the back of the head and kills him. Oh, man. Some sad stuff. So, they finish their mission, and they're heading off planet. Verge decides to stay. He says, guys, I'm going to stay here. And as the narrator is flying up, looking down at Verge, he almost has the urge to get to the ship's guns and shoot Verge. Seems somehow like it'd be doing him a favor. That look in his eyes as we lifted off. Hell, the poor guy was dead already. Oh man, Bruce Jones. Always writing stories like that. Really heartfelt stuff. This is a nice one. This one I don't think has the credits here, so let's go back to the contents. This writer, Colin Raff. I'm not familiar with Colin Raff as a writer or anything, but the art is by James Romberger, the really idiosyncratic cartoonist. I think he's based in New York City. He always seems to be drawing gritty, urban New York City type settings. This one takes place in New York City in the near future. And it looks like, global warming's come, the oceans have risen a little, everything's different in New York City. And all these like rich people keep colonizing the funky parts of the city where, the Bohemians live. And I guess down near the Williamsburg Bridge, it's Wharf Town. And all this whole culture is built around the river. And it's almost like this pirate culture. And one of the guys is talking to his friends. He says, guys, I can't explain it. I saw this old ice cream truck in the middle of the night, just riding around Wharf Town, playing its little songs. Pop goes the weasel. And their friends are like, hey, you're crazy. And he says, you know what? I'm going to follow that thing tonight. When I get off work, I'm following that ice cream truck and find out where it comes from. So he does just that thing. And he follows it really far. All the way to this like little, almost like a compound garbage dump. And when he goes inside the ice cream truck, It's completely gutted. No driver, no keys in the ignition. Just more junk. So he realizes that it's kind of a goofy idea. But he says, right along the edge of Wharftown, that's where it drives, leaving its droppings, staking its territory like a pissing dog. Just like any animal driven from its habitat, making a last stand. Desperate on the way out, just like the rest of us. So obviously making a linking to the ice cream truck is like this guy and his poor friends who are getting pushed out. Here we have expiration date, written and drawn by Klaus Janson. This is pretty decent for Klaus Janson. I was pretty kind of like this. And we see this guy running from, they're called the hardcore. They're basically like the cops. And they're chasing this guy. And the narrator is the guy's daughter. And we see in flashback that this guy is a scientist, the guy being chased. And he invented a resurrecting machine. Because when her cat dies, he resurrects it. And it works. And so back to the scientist on the run. He gets a gun. Doesn't buy any bullets. And he says, honey, get that machine ready for 4 o'clock. I'll be seeing you. It's called the Retriever. So I'll come through the Retriever at 4 o'clock. And it's a little unexplained why this hardcore, which is after him because he invented this amazing device, why they left it in the laboratory and didn't seize it. Because they do go to the laboratory and he flees. So she's like, but Dad, that means you're going to have to die. He's like, don't worry about it. So he's finally caught by the hardcore. They got him surrounded. And right at 4, he pulls a gun. Because, of course, their orders are to take him in alive. They want to pick his brain. But he's going to force their hand. And they shoot him. And then we see the daughter. I was thinking, I love my dad. I'm not leaving him. I'm going to stay right here, at least until I figure this thing out. So it's kind of left up in the air if she can even knows how to use the machine well enough to bring her dad back. We got number 3 here. And a cover by Edvin Biakovic, the guy who drew the opening story of last issue. Really nice cover, showing off all the various stories. Oh, this is nice. We got a story of The Split. Joe R. Lansdale, writer, great horror author, and at this point, a great comics writer. He's done plenty of comics. You may know him from the movie Bubba Hotep that was based on his book. He did that great, the 2 Jonah Hex miniseries with Tim Truman in the 90s. And this is kind of a goofy little tale. But look at this. Richard Corben illustrating. This is another thing. I'm pretty sure this is during Axel Alonso's reign in Vertigo. That's when Richard Corben started appearing in DC Vertigo comics, which would have been unheard of just 5 years earlier. He was, the heavy metal artist, self-published artist. And then all of a sudden he started doing work for hire for DC. And of course, when Axel Alonso moved to Marvel, he started doing stuff for Marvel. So let me tell you, as like growing up in the 70s and 80s, and I never would have thought Richard Corben would end up doing that. If you told me back then, like, oh yeah, Richard Corben's going to be a regular DC comic artist and Marvel artist, I'd be like, fuck no, that's not going to happen. So it's about this guy who works in a clock tower, and it seems like he's obsessed by it. His wife is like, you're always ignoring me. You love that watchtower. You love clocks more than you love me. So he's heading to work one day, and he's almost having like these little fantasies of killing his wife. Kind of sick, but he's like, yeah, no more complaining, no more nagging. Yeah, I'd shut her up. the clock tower gets hit by lightning and it splits him in two. It's almost like his shadow self comes out. And the shadow self runs back home. He's going to kill the wife. And he's, you know, the main character's thinking to himself is like, oh no, he's my dark side. He's like, I don't really want my wife to die. I love her. He's screaming after the shadow creature to stop. And he follows the shadow creature and tries to save his wife's life. This art is so interesting for Corben. Everyone's kind of like bulbous and kind of cutesy. Like the proportions are off. Their heads are too big for their bodies, like they do when they try to make things look cute. So they have this struggle, the protagonist and his shadow self. And apparently the shadow self doesn't like light. So he runs off back to the watchtower. And our protagonist pursues him. I wonder if Corben did the colors of this. I kind of doubt it, but really nice colors. No, it's a guy named Grant Golish. But it's almost, you know, Corben-worthy at this point in his career. He wasn't doing his vibrant, crazy colors like the 70s and 80s at this point. More flat. So he, another lightning bolt hits the watchtower, the clock tower, and kills the shadow self. And the guy returns home to his wife. And it's a happy ending. Oh, this one's weird. It's written by someone named Dozell Young. Never heard of them. Illustrated by Pat McEwen, the great cartoonist. I don't know if you know about Pat McEwen, but in the 80s, during the black and white boom, he was just, I think he was trying to be Paul Galassi. He was pretty good, like drawing in this very straight black and white style. And then he kind of disappeared for a while. And then he started popping up in like Dave Cooper's comics like Weasel with this amazing, just great cartoony style. Oh, I think I read somewhere that he went to animation for a while to make money. And I think you could see it in his art. It becomes very cartoony, very loose, very animated. Just a really great cartoonist. And cartoony, I meant to say. And this story's really weird. It's this guy, the captions are all this guy writing to his ex, who he abandoned, basically. And he's got a new girlfriend. And Driving Miss 134, it's called. And it's very odd. They don't really explain what the hell's going on. But apparently, this test subject at some kind of super secret government facility escaped. She's like a woman, maybe a clone, who is like completely radioactive. So we see all these guys just burning with radioactivity, just melting in her presence as she leaves. She's hitchhiking, and he picks her up. For some reason, the narrator is immune to her radioactivity. And he's just gaga over her. Here they're in a restaurant, and all the customers are dying around them, but they're just totally in love. But then he does seem to, like, get nauseous around her, but not totally die. And then I guess near the Nevada border, I don't know if this is them first consummating their relationship, but it looks like a nuclear cloud happens. A mushroom cloud, I meant to say. He says, I know how Oppenheimer felt. I did the nasty with a walk-in plague factory and lived. And let me tell you, I never felt more alive. So this guy kills the pursuers, her pursuers, because, of course, she escaped this lab. There's these government agents trying to retrieve her. And then I don't quite get their plan. Maybe you're not supposed to know. But he's basically saying, that they're now in New York City. I think it's no, I'm sorry, San Francisco. And they're basically going to unleash a massive plague. I don't know. But he says something like, no one knows the future, Lori. No one can tell you how it ends. All I know is whatever happens, it's going to be a blast. And Lori's TV all of a sudden goes to the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test. So I don't know. Something apocalyptic. Next story, Metal Fatigue, written by Mark Schultz of Cadillacs and Dinosaur fame, and illustrated by John Totleben, the great Kubert School graduate, famous for Swamp Thing, his inking Steve Bissette. Of course, beautifully drawn. It's John Totleben. It's rare to get interiors by John Totleben, even at this point. His eyes were deteriorating. I think he can't draw anymore. And these guys are basically visiting, I'm sorry, it's one guy and 3 robots. They're doing this expedition to the center of the Earth. They're going deeper into the Earth than anyone's ever gone before. And they see this giant gate. Man, look at the detail on these rocks and stuff. It's like the classic old 20th century illustrators, early 20th century. Just so many lines. And so beyond that, that massive door, there's this like ancient ruined city of giants. And there's all this treasure. And I like the storytelling here, using these things to divide time. It's one big drawing of the scene, but then we see them progress through. And this is the panels that let us know that, oh, there's not 3 of them. It's time has progressed. And so the guy all of a sudden sees the treasure. He doesn't care about science anymore. All he cares about is this treasure. Is like, oh my God, I'm rich. It's all mine. And then this woman appears, and she says, do not be afraid. You're in a holy place. And she tells him that he can take one thing from the treasure. Any one of those objects will give you more wealth than you could ever need. Man, look at that panel. Really nice illustration in here. That pointillism. It's like 1,000 dots in that face. She says, be aware, should you attempt to remove more than one thing granted, you will anger the protector of this place, and his wrath shall destroy you. And he instantly runs off. Like, just like, woo! And proceeds to immediately ignore her wishes. And he's obviously like putting more than one thing in his shirt, trying to hide it. She asks the robots, what do they desire? And they say the same all earthly things desire, to return to our native state, to rust and dust, to surrender to entropy. Meanwhile, back with the head of the expedition, because he, took more than one thing, this horrible looking, scary motherfucker kills him. Just grabs him and dissolves him into organic dust. And she tells the robots, your master has found his rest. You may continue on your way. And the robots proceed to just keep going deeper and deeper into the earth until they can go no further, until there's just magma, and they all just slowly walk into it. And so are all earthly things compelled by their natures to return home. Very sad little story. Here we got the last issue, number 4. And this is a cover by Esad Ribic, who went on to become a huge, popular, super mainstream artist. I think he did Thor. Once again, he followed Axel Alonso over to Marvel. Even after Axel Alonso left Marvel, he remained to be a superstar, hot shit artist. Pretty nice painted art. He also draws the first story in here, Native Tongue, written by Brian Azzarello. I think this is pretty early in Brian Azzarello's career. Maybe he had already just started 100 Bullets, though. I don't know. This is a pretty interesting concept. It's basically like this reporter. He's kind of works for like a National Enquirer type shitty newspaper. He's following this cattle mutilation story. And he realizes that doing his research, that the way these cows are mutilated are very similar to the work of certain serial killers in the same area. And these women are left with the same injuries as these cows. Yeah, here's one of the victims of the serial killer. Face skinned, basically peeled off. Genitalia removed, desanguinated, exsanguinated. And of course, it's a big mystery. Nobody knows why this is happening. But he's the only one who's made this connection. This art is really nice. It's just like, it's almost like painted. Maybe it is painted, I don't know. And he realizes that beyond this similarity in execution, if you look at a map between serial killer victims where they're left off in cattle mutilations, it almost like has this weird correlation. Like where the distances between them. For almost every victim of a serial killer, an animal counterpart has been found 77 miles southwest of it. It's a pretty crazy concept. So he's out investigating another mutilation, and this guy shows up. And he's a serial killer. And he kind of explains in his own insane way that this is all about language. It's communicating to the aliens. He says, some of us do understand. Me, Henry Lee, Bundy, Timothy, up there in Seattle. The Aztecs were fluent, but then again, they had plenty of raw material. It's all about language, their language, and he points to the stars. He says, I hate to do this because you've actually helped us out by publishing your articles. You've helped communicate this language, but now you're just going to be another victim. Weird stuff. This one's really interesting just because this artist, Gregory Benton, very, almost looks like a children's book style or just a weird little story just because of the way it's drawn. It's called Latchkey. We see these two little latchkey kids. And this guy, this predator is watching like, ooh, there's no parents home. So I'm going to make my way in there. And he's watching him through the windows, this creepy guy. And he breaks into the house through the basement. And he's got one of those shockers, or whatever you call them, zappers. And he grabs one of the little girls, and when he zaps the girl, it turns out it's just a doll. And the two little girls shove him into the basement, or shove the door behind him, so he falls back into the basement. So these little girls are not what they seem. Turns out they're like, I don't know, like maybe clones or something. There's like 20 of them. And they take a buzzsaw to him. And later on, the girls are watching TV, eating snacks. And we see that guy's eyeball. One of them eats it on a cracker. Strange little story. This one's called Perfect Stranger. Written by John Ray Reiber. Did I say that right? John Nay Reiber. Did a lot of writing for Vertigo. Pretty much that's the only place I've really seen that guy. And illustrated by Danijel Zazelj. And I think he's another one of those Bosnian Serbian cartoonists. Somewhere in Eastern Europe, at least, I know he's from. And it takes place in the near, like, cyberpunk future. And our protagonist, the narrator, is this woman. And she's talking about how she wants revenge on this guy. Apparently, this guy raped her. He basically knocked her out with this drug, which is, I think it's called a Mimi, which is really just someone else's consciousness. So your consciousness is obliterated for 2 hours if you take this drug, and it's someone else's, mined from someone else's brain. So imagine it's like a roofie if you're the person, because you don't remember. So he did that. Some guy did this to her. Now she is on the warpath, wants revenge. She gets this taxi ride into the city, tries out her poison lipstick on the guy. I don't know what he ever did to deserve it. He's just a taxi driver. She goes to the club where she knows this guy hangs out. And we see her thoughts. And the worst part about it is that fake personality she had for 2 hours from the Mimi. She said it was the best she ever felt. Whoever that person was, whose personality was mined for that Mimi, was just confident and everything she ever always wanted to be when she moved to the big city, you know? Sure of herself. So she wants to find out, you know, where they mined this. Other than get revenge on the guy, she also wants to know. So she's pretending to be someone she's not. Like, she looks a little different. So the guy doesn't recognize her. But she knocks him out, slips him a Mickey, takes him to this place, and she's got him tied up in a chair. She's got a broken bottle to his throat. And she says, I want her, more of her. She wants more of that Mimi that he doped her with. And he says, you don't know a thing, do you? The one you want is Lisa. And when she goes to the Mimi Processing Center, Lisa is just a life image synthetic alternative. It's not even a real person. Very strange story. Really like this artist. Good stuff. So there you have it, guys. Sorry for all the spoilers, because all the stories are that old EC twist type thing, ironic endings. So I hope you guys, I wanted to say this earlier, is that I know when I look at these comics, I pretty much give away the whole plot. So every one is a spoiler. But if you just want to look at the comics, I guess all I can say is turn down the volume and you can see me flip through. Because let's be honest, my comments aren't very insightful. I just kind of say, ooh, that's nice art there. That's pretty. So if you don't want the spoiler, just turn down the volume. And but I find it fun to just flip through comics, look at the various artists and stuff. That's why I started this site, because I was addicted to watching all those other sites where guys show off their comics. And I said, I want to do that. I want to show off my comics. Because for all my faults, I do have one of the best comic collections in the world, or at least west of the Mississippi. So there you have it, Strange Adventures number 1 through 4. I hope you enjoyed it. These are definitely worth having in the Academy. They're just some beautiful art. Some great stories, you know, some hidden, some not so great, like most anthologies, but just a really nice package. Like Axel Alonso did a lot of great stuff when he was at Vertigo, and a lot of great stuff when he was at Marvel. So I think people forget how important a good editor can be, because man, when he left DC, he took a lot of good stuff with him, and When he left Marvel, same thing. So I guess that's it. And I'll see you next time here at the Herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies.